A 9-year-old girl in a quiet English village closed her eyes one afternoon in 1871 and did not open them for 11 years. Her name was Ellen Sadler. She lived in Turville, Buckinghamshire, a place so unremarkable it barely warranted a footnote in any county record. She breathed. She swallowed thin liquids her mother fed her through patient, daily ritual. She grew, but she did not wake. Physicians traveled from London. They examined her, debated her, published papers about her, and left without answers. Some suggested catalepsy, others proposed hysteria, a word Victorian medicine applied liberally to things it could not explain. When Ellen finally opened her eyes in 1882, she offered no account of where she had been. She remembered nothing. She simply returned. The medical record closed. The explanation never arrived. Ellen Sadler was not the last person to humble the institutions that claimed authority over the human body. She was merely the beginning. The case of Joe Cameron did not come to light the way most medical mysteries do. There was no dramatic collapse, no alarming test result, no worried family member pressing doctors for answers. Instead, it surfaced almost incidentally, following a routine hand surgery at a Scottish hospital in 2013. The anesthetist noted something peculiar in the recovery room. Cameron, then 65 years old, required no pain relief whatsoever. When pressed, she mentioned, almost apologetically, that she had never really needed it. Broken bones had felt like mild pressure. Childbirth, she recalled, had been manageable. Dentistry had never troubled her. Further investigation revealed a mutation in a gene called FAH-OUT, previously unknown to science, that had effectively silenced her pain response entirely. But the implications extended further than analgesia. Cameron also reported no anxiety, no fear, and a persistent, almost preternature, optimism. Geneticists studying her case suggested she might hold the key to entirely new approaches to chronic pain treatment. What remains striking is how long she lived before anyone noticed. 6.5 decades, carrying a biological anomaly that science hadn't even conceived of yet. On the morning of July 2, 1951, a landlady in St. Petersburg, Florida, knocked on the door of her tenant, 67-year-old Mary Hardy Reeser. When no answer came, she reached for the handle and found it inexplicably hot to the touch. Firefighters entered to find a scene that defied straightforward interpretation. Reeser had been reduced almost entirely to ash. A small pile of carbonized material, a few bone fragments, a shrunken skull, and one intact foot in a black satin slipper were all that remained. The chair she had been sitting in was partially destroyed. The ceiling above was stained with soot. Everything else in the room, newspapers, furniture, the carpet beyond a small scorched circle, was untouched. The FBI consulted their own experts. The conclusion reached with evident discomfort was that Reeser had become what investigators termed a wick, her body fat sustaining a slow, internal combustion. Critics of this explanation have pointed out that crematorium furnaces operating at 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit for hours cannot produce the degree of skeletal destruction found in that apartment. The file was closed regardless. During the German bombardment of Oslo in 1941, a young Norwegian woman was struck by shrapnel and sustained a significant brain injury. When she recovered, she discovered something that unsettled everyone around her. She now spoke Norwegian with a pronounced German accent. She had never lived in Germany. She had never spent meaningful time with German speakers. The accent was not something she was performing. It was simply, inexplicably, how she now spoke. Decades later, neurologists would accumulate dozens of similar cases under the term foreign accent syndrome. Patients who, following strokes, tumors, or traumatic brain injuries, emerged from unconsciousness speaking with accents entirely foreign to their biography. A British woman began speaking with a Chinese lilt. An American man woke from a stroke with what listeners identified as a West African cadence. The neurological explanation involves damage to the regions governing speech rhythm and melody. But that explanation answers the mechanism, not the mystery. The brain apparently contains accents it has never heard spoken aloud. By every measurable standard, Phineas Gage should not have survived September 13, 1848. He was overseeing a blasting operation in Cavendish, Vermont, when an accidental detonation drove a 3-foot-7-inch iron tamping rod, weighing 13.5 pounds, upward through his left cheek, through the front of his brain, and out through the top of his skull. Gage was thrown backward, but regained consciousness within minutes. He was seated upright when the physician arrived. He spoke coherently. He described the accident himself. Physically, Phineas Gage recovered. Neurologically, he did not. His foreman, friends, and the physician who treated him over subsequent years all reported the same observation. The polite, reliable, conscientious man they had known was gone. In his place was someone impulsive, profane, fitfully aggressive, and incapable of sustained planning. His employer would not rehire him. He drifted. He died 16 years later, having demonstrated something that disturbed the medical establishment of the 1840s deeply. That personality, identity, the self we consider fundamental, might be nothing more than an arrangement of tissue. Damage the arrangement, and the person inside it changes entirely. The hemophilia that threaded through the royal families of 19th century Europe moved so quietly that its true reach was not understood for generations. Queen Victoria, who carried the mutation silently, passed it through her daughters into the courts of Russia, Spain, and Prussia. Her grandson, Tsarevich Alexei of Russia, suffered from its most severe form. He bled internally from minor injuries. He screamed for days at a time. His mother, Tsarina Alexandra, in her desperation to keep her son alive, granted extraordinary access and influence to a Siberian mystic named Rasputin, whose methods, still unexplained, appeared on multiple occasions to arrest the boy's bleeding episodes when medicine could not. Historians who have examined the Romanov correspondence suggest that Rasputin's hold over the imperial family was fundamentally medical in origin. A genetic disorder carried silently by a queen, inherited by a child, may have altered the conditions under which Russia entered the First World War, and by extension, everything that followed. The mutation has since been traced through genomic analysis of Romanov remains. Its consequences remain incalculable. Harry Eastlack was born in Philadelphia in 1933 with fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, a condition so rare that fewer than 900 cases have ever been documented worldwide. The disease operates by a grotesque misinterpretation of injury. When the body of an FOP patient is damaged, when muscle tears, when connective tissue is strained, when even a vaccination is administered, the immune response generates not scar tissue but bone. Gradually, methodically, the disease builds a second skeleton around the first, one that cannot be surgically removed without triggering yet more bone formation in response to the incision. By the time Eastlack died at 39, his body was almost entirely locked into a fixed position. He could move only his lips. He had specified before his death that his skeleton be preserved and studied. It stands today in the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, a monument to what happens when the body's healing mechanism loses the ability to distinguish repair from construction. Researchers studying FOP believe it may illuminate fundamental questions about how bone itself is regulated. Harry Eastlack, in death, has contributed more to that research than he could have imagined in life. The patients who began appearing in American clinics in the early 2000s described experiences so consistent across unconnected individuals that dismissing them as coincidence required active effort. Colored fibers, red, blue, white, emerging from beneath intact, unbroken skin. Sensations of something moving just below the surface. Wounds that healed abnormally, or not at all. The condition acquired a name: Morgellons. The response from mainstream medicine was rapid and, to many patients, devastating. The fibers, clinicians argued, were textile contamination from clothing introduced by patients who were themselves the source of their wounds, a diagnosis called delusional parasitosis. The CDC conducted a formal investigation between 2006 and 2012. Their conclusion: no infectious or environmental cause identified. But independent researchers who examined the fibers found that several were composed of cellulose not found in any known textile. A 2013 study identified Borrelia spirochetes, the bacterium associated with Lyme disease, in tissue samples from Morgellons patients. The study was contested. The debate has not concluded. Thousands of patients remain without a diagnosis that satisfies either their symptoms or their physicians. Jill Price contacted a memory researcher at the University of California, Irvine, in 2000 with a simple, measured claim. She could remember every day of her life since the age of 14 in complete, involuntary, chronological detail. Researchers initially approached her with scientific caution. What followed was 5 years of testing that could not locate the boundary of her recall. She was asked random dates from her past. She provided the day of the week, the weather in her city, the dominant news story, what she had eaten. Every answer was verified against external records. Every answer was correct. The condition, eventually termed hyperthymesia, has since been identified in approximately 60 individuals worldwide. In Price's own account, the experience is not the gift it might superficially appear. The memories are not selective. They are total, constant, and arrive uninvited. She described living with the past as an unceasing presence, running parallel to every present moment like an unwanted second life. The mechanism remains poorly understood. Why certain brains encode with this totality, and why the filter that normally discards the unremarkable fails to develop, has not been explained. Cotard's delusion is listed in the diagnostic literature as a rare neuropsychiatric syndrome characterized by the nihilistic conviction that one is dead, that one's organs have been removed or have ceased to function, or that one does not exist. The description, clinical and orderly as it reads, does not prepare a person for what the condition looks like in practice. A Scottish man, identified in case literature only as W.I., sustained brain damage in a motorcycle accident and subsequently became convinced that he had died of AIDS and gone to hell. When his family relocated Ted temporarily to South Africa, he interpreted the heat as confirmation of his location in the afterlife. His belief was not distress. It was calm, considered, and utterly unshakable by logical argument. A more extensively documented case involved a patient who ceased eating on the grounds that deceased individuals have no metabolic need. He was hospitalized for malnutrition before the underlying delusion was identified and treated. Brain imaging in Cotard's patients has revealed abnormal activity between the fusiform face area and the amygdala, a disconnection between recognition and emotional response. The face in the mirror is recognized but generates no feeling of self. What remains haunting is not the neurological diagram, but the implication it carries, that the sense of being alive, of existing, may itself be constructed rather than fundamental. Across these 10 cases, separated by centuries, continents, and entirely different biological mechanisms, a single uncomfortable pattern persists. Medicine, at its best, is a discipline of pattern recognition. But each of these cases presented patterns that the dominant models of their time could not accommodate. Ellen Sadler's decades-long sleep was filed under hysteria and forgotten. Mary Reeser's impossible incineration was closed as an administrative matter. The Morgellons patients were reclassified as their own affliction. What connects them is not the supernatural. It is the gap, recurring and uncomfortable, between what the body demonstrably does and what the institutions studying it are prepared to explain. The official position in most of these cases remains one of either partial explanation or deliberate silence. Yet the consistency of the anomalies, the credibility of the witnesses and patients involved, and the physical evidence left behind in at least several instances suggests something more disciplined than dismissal is warranted. Perhaps the real question these cases raise is not whether medicine has failed particular patients, but whether the framework through which medicine understands the body is itself more provisional than its practitioners typically acknowledge. The human body, it seems, has not finished surprising the people assigned to understand it, and the cases we find most difficult to explain are almost always the ones that have the most to teach.